The SEC. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Thanks for being with us here on the Tuesday edition on the early side on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio. Dial us up if you want to watch the radio on TV, on YouTube. Search Bloomberg Business News Live. As we want to keep this conversation fresh with Nathan Dean, our friend at Bloomberg Intelligence, was listening along with you and I, senior U.S. policy analyst. When we consider, Nathan, great to see all the angst that surrounded her predecessor here at the top of the agency. What is the approach that makes her different from Gary Gensler?
Well, Gary Gensler took the approach for when it comes to crypto that 1930s era securities law still applied, and therefore you had to come in and register.
Yeah.
And you sort of had to fit your plan within something that hadn't been updated in 90 years. What the SEC is doing right now, on the other hand, is they're saying, look, we now have a new digital asset class, and there needs to be new rules for the road to determine how is this going to operate in today's markets. So, they mentioned in the interview the Clarity Act. This is the bill that's going through Congress. Yep. Think of that as like a touchdown, using a football analogy. What the SEC can do on its own gets in the field goal range. Mm-hmm. So it's not exactly going to get you exactly what you want from the Clarity Act, but what the SEC is doing in terms of clarifying what is a security, what is a commodity, and trying to figure out how firms can operate within today's regulations will certainly be much more beneficial to the Robinhoods and the Coinbases of the world than what we saw under the Gary Gensler era.
So as we try to unravel that, there was an interesting question about working with the CFTC, the extent to which the SEC can even do that without a leadership role at the CFTC. What did you make of her answer?
Well, so I think obviously the SEC and the CFTC are going to have to work together on this because remember, the SEC has authority over securities and the CFTC has authorities over commodities. Mm-hmm. And Bitcoin has already been deemed by the courts to be a commodity. And I think most of the crypto world wants their assets to be within the CFTC realm. The problem is that we don't have any permanent leadership over the CFTC. Right. Brian Quinten's former CFTC commissioner was confirmed. Then the Senate Ag Committee pulled back, due to some reporting that maybe some folks in the crypto space aren't exactly thrilled with this idea of new regulation coming in. Mm-hmm. So I think for anything to really happen, you need both agencies to be working together, and you need that leadership to be put in place over at the CFTC so they can drive their changes forward in addition to what the SEC is doing, because I think most of the crypto world is interested in what the CFTC will eventually be doing.
Interesting. One of the headlines across the terminal from that conversation, Peirce says not waiting for legislation to work on crypto. What can the SEC do without it?
So essentially, the SEC can, at a first point, go out there and say, look, we're not going to put you into enforcement violations. Okay. The idea of a gotcha violation. Yeah, sure. And what Commissioner Peirce was talking about was almost what we call in the regulatory space is principles-based regulation. She talked about pilot programs, and she said, well, we're going to have multiple pilot programs. To me, what that says is that we're just going to test maybe regulatory sandboxes, innovation, but we're going to go out there and we're going to let crypto firms develop what they think is going to be meeting the spirit of the regulation. Mm-hmm. They'll come to the SEC, and the SEC will say, great, we like this, you can continue with this. We don't like that. Remember, she said in the tokenization piece, securities are still securities, right, but you're not going to get hit with the gotcha violation for it. So it's going to be a little bit more innovative for the industry.
Looking at Bitcoin, where are we today as we discuss all of this? Just below $120,000. It's up a little bit less than 1% today. There was a huge development recently that the president signed the executive order to allow 401ks to start using crypto. Wasn't that supposed to be the floodgates moment? How come we're not at $250,000 on this?
Well, because I remember the executive order is just the first start of this process.
So when is that complete?
Well, so the executive order directs the Department of Labor and the SEC to go forth and conduct rulemakings within 180 days. Okay. Now, we think the Department of Labor, because just remember, they own the retirement account jurisdiction due to ERISA. They're going to put out a proposal, we think, sometime between now, most likely either the beginning of next year. Then it has to go through that comment period. Okay. Where I'm going is you're not going to get a finalization on a proposal until mid to late next year. Wow. But then even at that point, well, if I'm a 401k fiduciary, do I want to bring in Bitcoin? Do I want to bring in Ethereum? How do I deal with the risk profile of a decentralized asset? I think you're going to see 401ks programs to come in and say, look, we are going to start investing in crypto, but it may not be the floodgates that people were anticipating.
Well, it's really interesting. As a forward-looking mechanism, you would think that they'd start pricing this stuff in because this is the story we've been hearing for years, right? Once we get these in retirement accounts, once there's an industrial component, this thing goes to the moon. That was the justification for $1 million coin, wasn't it?
Well, I think also a lot of it is the institutional adoption because look, retail adoption is out there in terms of speculation, but people want to see in the crypto space, they want to see institutional adoption. that usually only would come, I don't think that would come unless the Clarity Act passes.
Understood.
That gives those companies the ability to have their breather and say, look, we can go forth and actually develop strategies on bringing in crypto. But at the end of the day, there's a risk profile. These fiduciaries have to make sure that they're not just investing something that goes to zero. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying it would, but again, they have to account for the risk profile.
Interesting. So once the legislation passes, then we could see a repricing of the coin, I think is what you're saying, yes?
Well, I think once the legislation passes, the crypto advocates don't really have anything else that they would want from Washington.
Got it.
Now it's up to the market.
Understood. As we spend time with our friend Nathan Dean, I see you're writing about pot again. Trump's remarks point to marijuana status change, but not in second half. What is Nathan talking about? This elusive rescheduling that we've touched on so many times. It had cannabis investors in a tizzy this week, and the president did speak. Well, he was asked about it. He didn't bring it up at the news conference yesterday. Here's President Trump.
We're looking at it. Some people like it. Some people hate it. Some people hate the whole concept of marijuana because if it does bad for the children, it does bad for people that are older than children. But we're looking at reclassification, and we'll make a determination over the next few weeks. Very complicated subject, the subject of marijuana. I've heard great things having to do with medical, and I've had bad things having to do with just about everything else.
Since we're older than children, we can talk about this. Just that moment sent pot stocks on a tizzy. The MJ ETF was up like 27% in a day. Of course, we'd have to do that about 1,000 more times to get back to our high. But has anything changed here in your view? Is getting some lip service, has anything actually changed in terms of policy?
No, I mean, I think that answer was really good at saying, yes, we're going to do something, but maybe we won't. What I'm going with is I think you are going to see an announcement from the White House coming to the DEA saying, look, we are going to move forward with some form of reschedulization, but I think it's going to be under the guise that there needs to be more analysis. That's not exactly what the pot community wants to hear.
They've heard that before.
Because we do think anecdotally that this DEA is not in line with this move. Terrence Cole, the administrator of the DEA, has a history of anti-marijuana views.
Yeah.
So what I think, to be careful from what we're saying to our clients is, look, I do anticipate you're going to see a positive announcement that will get folks saying, look, reschedulization has happened. Mm-hmm. But let's remember, we've got 12,000 comment letters to write or to read. Oh. We've got a couple more hearings to go through. We've got additional studies and analyses to go through. That can't be done in 2025. And so I don't think this is going to I think this is going to be slow walked. I think they're going to continue to play this process out, and we'll have to get a better idea if they're actually going to do it in the first half of next year.
So it sounds like for investors who've been sitting on these stocks and watching them go down in just a painful process since everyone got their hopes up ahead of the Biden administration, that nothing's about to change anytime soon. If you're going to make money, it's on volatility.
Exactly. I mean, the reason why these stocks are going up 20, 30% is because these are low dollar denomination stocks. I mean, these are $5 and less. My colleague Ken Shea just put a note out just this morning as well, saying, look, the marijuana industry is struggling. And even if you get reschedulization, it's not going to change a lot of parameters from the fact that, there's a lot of issues going on with marijuana at the moment in terms of logistics, in terms of compliance costs, in terms of risks. Mm-hmm. And even if you get full legalization, which we don't think is in the cards anytime soon, you still are going to have market-sensitive pressures against this industry. So, reschedulization gets you that 20% bounce that, you may want from a speculation perspective. It doesn't get you much more than that.
We get safe banking in the next year? Nobody talks about that anymore.
Nobody talks about it. Wow. We don't think it's in the cards.
Not in the cards. Incredible. As the president considers the whole concept of marijuana. I think the way he puts that. By the way, somebody told me recently only old people call it pot now. Is that?
I still call it pot, so I must be old.
Nathan Dean, we'll be old together. Bloomberg Intelligence, many thanks, sir. His phone's ringing off the hook. I sit right next to Nathan. And this is, in fact, what people are calling about, well, at least on a day like that. Imagine having Nathan at the other end of the phone. That's why we bring him on every week to talk to us here on Balance of Power.